She thought she was flying to Dubai for the greatest love story of her life. But at the arrivals gate, one suitcase turned her world into a living nightmare. From romantic messages and midnight calls to cold handcuffs and a prison cell, this is the shocking true story of how a teacher's dream of love became a global scandal. What really happened at Dubai Airport, and how could trust become the deadliest trap of all? Stay with us, because once this story begins, you won't be able to look away. The fluorescent tubes buzzed faintly above, filling the small interrogation room with a cold, unwelcoming glow. A metal table divided the space, and on one side sat Lauren Carter, a 29-year-old teacher from Tempe, Arizona. Her fingers trembled against the steel surface as her eyes fixed on the suitcase in front of her. It wasn't even hers, at least not in any meaningful sense. But right now, officials in neatly pressed uniforms were treating it as if it defined her entire life. Two men in khaki security vests and a woman in dark police blue flanked the table. Their faces revealed nothing, but their posture carried an unmistakable weight of suspicion. On the corner of the table sat a photograph of the man Lauren had crossed the world to meet, Arda Kaya, the Turkish architect who had promised her love, devotion, and a future together. In the image, he smiled warmly, the same smile she had seen countless times through glowing phone screens. Yet in this room, his eyes felt different, distant, hollow, dangerous. The lead officer leaned forward, his English formal but sharp, the accent shaping his words like a blade. "Is this the man you are protecting?" Lauren's throat constricted. She wanted to scream that she wasn't protecting anyone, that she was just a teacher, that she hadn't even left North America until yesterday. Instead, her voice scraped out as a whisper. "Protecting him. He destroyed everything." But the officers were unmoved. Their gaze dropped to the suitcase, a large brown leather case with gleaming brass locks. To Lauren, it had seemed heavy because it was stuffed with Turkish carpets, perfumes, and gifts for her family. At least, that was what Arda had told her, moments before he vanished into the crowd at the terminal. Now, under the fluorescent glare, the luggage felt like a ticking bomb waiting to explode her life into pieces. One officer pulled on latex gloves and slid the key across the table. It was the same small gold key Arda had pressed into her palm, saying she might need it just in case. At the time, it had felt romantic, like a gesture of intimacy. Now, it was nothing but evidence. The lock clicked, the lid rose. Inside lay neatly folded fabrics, colorful scarves, and boxes of sweets exactly as described. For a fleeting second, Lauren's lungs expanded with relief. Maybe this was just a misunderstanding. Maybe the barking dog in the customs hall had been wrong. But the relief didn't last. The officer began removing items one by one, lining them on the metal surface with clinical precision. Beneath the final layer of souvenirs, he produced a knife, slicing into the lining of the suitcase with deliberate strokes. The tearing sound echoed in the sterile room. From beneath the false compartment emerged carefully wrapped bricks, compact plastic packages stacked tightly like textbooks. The fluorescent lights glinted off the seals. Another officer began photographing each row methodically, counting under his breath in Arabic. When the female officer spoke, her voice carried the weight of a verdict. 15 kilograms of captagon, possession with intent to distribute. The word struck Lauren like a physical blow. Captagon. The name sounded foreign, menacing, unreal. But the officer's expressions confirmed its significance. In the United Arab Emirates, narcotics weren't just a crime. They were treated as an assault on the nation itself. Penalties could reach decades behind bars. Some cases ended with a death sentence. Lauren pressed both hands to her face, her chest heaving. She wanted to tell them about her students back home, about the handmade posters on her classroom walls, about her parents waiting for her call. Instead, the words tumbled out, broken, desperate. No, you don't understand. I'm a teacher. He gave it to me. Arda said it was gifts. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." The officer photographing the drugs barely looked up. His tone was flat, almost routine. "Everyone says they didn't know." Her wrists were pulled behind her, and the cold bite of handcuffs snapped shut. The officers recited her rights, explaining she could contact her embassy after processing. The phrase, "anything you say can be used against you," reverberated in her ears like a death knell. Lauren caught a distorted glimpse of herself in the interrogation room mirror as they led her out. She didn't recognize the reflection. Eyes swollen with tears, hair disheveled from hours of travel, lips quivering with fear. Gone was the hopeful woman who had boarded a plane in Arizona, certain she was flying into her happily ever after. In her place was someone authorities already saw as an international criminal. As the heavy door clanged shut behind her, a final thought blazed in her mind like a cruel punchline. She had crossed oceans to meet the man of her dreams. Instead, she had stepped directly into a nightmare, one that would test every shred of her innocence, her strength, and her will to survive. In the quiet desert city of Tempe, Arizona, the rhythm of life for Lauren Carter had always been steady, predictable, even comforting. At 29 years old, she had carved out a reputation as a devoted third-grade teacher at Copper Ridge Elementary. Her classroom was a riot of colors, hand-drawn charts, reading corners lined with stuffed animals, and student projects pinned proudly to the walls. Parents spoke of her with admiration, noting how she often stayed late to help children struggling with reading or math. Lauren thrived in the structured world of education. She believed deeply in the power of small acts of kindness, bringing snacks for kids who forgot their lunch, staying up late to craft personalized worksheets, or sending encouraging notes home to parents. For her students, she wasn't just a teacher. She was the adult who believed in them unconditionally. But when the final bell rang and the children spilled out into the Arizona sun, Lauren's life grew quiet, almost too quiet. The laughter and noise of her classroom gave way to evenings spent grading papers alone at her kitchen table. Her tidy one-bedroom apartment reflected her orderly personality. Shelves stacked with novels, Disney DVDs from her childhood neatly lined up, and a couch often occupied by her rescue cat, Clover. Her friends often teased her about still watching animated movies, but Lauren found comfort in fairy tales. She clung to the idea that true love wasn't just possible, but inevitable. Yet in her own life, romance had always seemed to slip through her fingers. 6 months before, she had ended a serious relationship with Ryan, her boyfriend of 2 years. He'd accepted a new job in California, urging her to come with him. Lauren refused. Abandoning her students mid-year felt like betrayal. Ryan's response had been cutting. "This isn't going anywhere, Lauren. We both know it." His words echoed in her mind long after he left. The breakup hollowed her. On social media, friends posted wedding photos, engagements, baby announcements. Lauren scrolled through, smiling politely, then closed the apps with a knot in her stomach. She tried to reassure her mother, Martha Carter, during their weekly calls. Martha's voice often carried barely hidden worry. "Honey, maybe join a yoga class or a book club. You need to meet people." Lauren would laugh it off. "I'm fine, Mom." But late at night, loneliness pressed down like the Arizona heat, heavy and unrelenting. Her father, George Carter, a retired police officer, was more pragmatic. Over dinner, he would gently remind her, "You're young, smart, and good-hearted. You'll find someone when the time's right." But Lauren didn't believe him anymore. At 29, she was starting to suspect that love wasn't written into her story. It was her colleague and friend Elena Morales who planted the seed that would change everything. Elena, vivacious and practical, had been divorced for 3 years and was back in the dating world. One Friday afternoon, as they packed up their classrooms, Elena leaned against the whiteboard with a grin. "Lauren, you've got to broaden your horizons. I've been chatting with this guy from Spain on an app. You wouldn't believe how interesting he is." Lauren wrinkled her nose. "Online dating. International. Sounds like a disaster waiting to happen." Elena laughed, pulling out her phone to show the app. "It's not shady. It's called World Connect. People sign up because they want serious relationships, not flings." "Imagine it. You could meet someone who shows you the world." Lauren hesitated. She'd always considered dating apps impersonal, like shopping for people. But that night, after grading a stack of spelling tests and microwaving dinner, she found herself staring at the app in the App Store. Her thumb hovered. Against her better judgment, she downloaded it. Setting up her profile took hours. She chose photos carefully. One of her hiking Camelback Mountain, another laughing at a friend's wedding, a third with Clover curled on her lap. She typed slowly, deliberately. "Elementary school teacher from Arizona. Loves books, hiking, and volunteering at animal shelters. Believes kindness matters." It was simple, honest. The first week was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers around the globe. An engineer in Germany, a doctor in Australia, a businessman in Brazil. Most fizzled into awkward small talk. Lauren considered deleting the app. And then came the message that stopped her cold. "Hello, Lauren. Your profile touched me deeply. There is kindness in your eyes, and I would be honored to know the woman behind that smile." It was from Arda Kaya, a 34-year-old architect based in Izmir, Turkey. His photos showed a strikingly handsome man in tailored suits standing before sleek, modern buildings. One image caught him leaning against the railing of a yacht at sunset, city lights glittering in the background. Arda's profile spoke of designing sustainable spaces, traveling widely for his work, and seeking a woman who valued loyalty, family, and adventure. Lauren stared at the screen, her heart fluttering. This was different. Not the rushed compliments or empty flattery she'd seen from others. His words seemed thoughtful, almost poetic. She typed back, erasing and rewriting several times before hitting send. "Thank you, Arda. I'd love to hear more about your work and what inspires you." She closed the app, her heart racing. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt a flicker of something she had almost given up on. Hope. The first days of messages with Arda Kaya felt like stepping into a new world. Where others had sent one-line compliments, his replies were long, thoughtful, almost lyrical. He told her about his passion for architecture, about how he saw buildings not as static objects, but as places where human lives and stories unfolded. He asked her about her classroom in Tempe, about the children she taught and what inspired her to choose education. "You are shaping the future," he wrote one evening. "Every child who learns from you carries your gift into the world." Lauren read that message 3 times, her cheeks burning with warmth. She was used to polite recognition of her work, but no one had ever framed her profession in such reverent terms. For once, she felt truly seen. Within a week, their conversation stretched from the app to WhatsApp, where her phone buzzed daily with greetings. Good morning messages accompanied by photos of Izmir's waterfront bathed in sunrise. Good night texts paired with Turkish poetry and translation. He began calling her "My dear Lauren," a phrase that made her heart stumble with each notification. Their first video call had been nerve-wracking. She spent hours getting ready, changing outfits multiple times, rehearsing how to greet him. But when Arda's face appeared on her phone screen, smiling broadly, the tension melted. He looked even more handsome than in his profile, with sharp features softened by warm brown eyes. His accented English lent his words a musical quality. "Lauren," he said, almost reverent, "you are more beautiful than I imagined. Your eyes, they shine." The call lasted nearly 3 hours. She told him about her childhood in Arizona, about summers spent hiking the desert trails, about her dream of one day starting a family. He shared stories about losing his father young, about his close bond with his mother who had raised him alone. He confessed that though he had dated before, none of those relationships had felt real. Too many women, he said, had been drawn only to his money or success. "With you," he told her, his tone dropping to a whisper, "I feel safe. You care about who I am, not what I own." The words landed like a seed in her heart, taking root instantly. As weeks passed, Arda wove himself into her daily life. When Lauren had a rough day with an unruly student, he listened patiently, reminding her of her value. When she mentioned her grandmother in Florida, he sent flowers to her apartment with a note, "For the best granddaughter in the world." Small packages began arriving in the mail. A silk scarf dyed in turquoise shades that matched her eyes. A silver bracelet inscribed with a Turkish proverb about love. Every gift carried a note written in elegant script, affirming his affection. Lauren wore the bracelet every day, touching it absent-mindedly during lessons, as though it tethered her to him across the ocean. Her friends noticed the change. At lunch breaks, she hummed under her breath, cheeks glowing as she shared snippets of their conversations. Elena Morales, ever supportive but pragmatic, raised an eyebrow. "I'm glad you're happy, Lauren," she said one afternoon. "But isn't this moving? Fast. It's been months and you've never met him in person." Lauren bristled slightly. "Jess, when you know, you know. We talk for hours every day. I've never felt a connection like this." Her parents were less subtle. During dinner with her father, George leaned forward, his police instincts sharp. "Sweetheart, be careful. Men online can say anything. You don't really know him." But Lauren waved their warnings away. Arda's voice, his gestures, the consistency of his affection, everything convinced her he was genuine. By the 6-month mark, their nightly video calls had become a ritual. Sometimes they spoke of their future home, which Arda described in vivid detail. A house with tall windows, a garden for children to play, a small study where Lauren could read in peace while he worked on his designs. It felt intoxicating. She was no longer the teacher who went home to an empty apartment. She was half of a story that stretched across continents. Still, questions gnawed at her late at night. Why hadn't they met yet? Why always delays? When she asked, Arda's explanations always seemed reasonable. A major project deadline, his mother's fragile health, complicated visa processes for visiting America. "My darling," he assured her, "I want nothing more than to be with you, but right now I must finish this project that secures our future. Once it is done, I will come." His voice carried such conviction that Lauren couldn't help but believe him. Then, one September evening, as she returned home from another long day at Copper Ridge Elementary, her phone lit up with his name. His voice came through filled with excitement. "Lauren, I've been thinking. Waiting any longer is unbearable. I cannot come to America yet, but what if we meet somewhere else? A place in the middle. Somewhere beautiful, where our first moments together will be unforgettable." Her heart pounded. "Where?" "Abu Dhabi," he said without hesitation. "It is the jewel of the Emirates. Luxury, architecture, beauty, all in one. I can fly from Turkey. You can fly from Arizona. It will be perfect." The suggestion was intoxicating, exotic beyond anything Lauren had ever imagined. She had seen photos of gleaming towers and palm-shaped islands in magazines, never once dreaming she would set foot there. The idea of meeting Arda in such a glamorous city felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. She paused, whispering, "It sounds incredible, but I don't know if I can afford it." "My love," Arda soothed, "you need only your ticket. Everything else is my gift. The hotel, the meals, the tours, so I will handle it all. You deserve to be treated like the princess you are." Tears welled in her eyes. After years of disappointment, loneliness, and failed relationships, someone was finally offering her a dream. That night, Lauren lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying his words. She was certain of it now. This was not just another online romance. This was destiny. She was going to Abu Dhabi. The decision haunted her for days before it finally solidified into certainty. Lauren Carter sat at her kitchen table in Tempe with her laptop open, spreadsheets of airfare options glowing against the dim light of her lamp. The fall semester was underway at Copper Ridge Elementary, and while her students filled her days with energy and routine, her nights were consumed by one thought: Abu Dhabi. When Arda had suggested the trip, she'd laughed nervously, insisting she couldn't possibly make such an extravagant journey. But his voice, calm and reassuring, had painted a picture she couldn't stop replaying. Luxury hotels, candlelit dinners, the first embrace after months of waiting. "All you need," he had said, "is the ticket. Everything else will be my gift to us." And so she searched. The flight wasn't cheap, nearly $2,000 that would wipe out most of her savings. But when she saw the departure dates, October 15th through 22, aligning perfectly with her school's fall break, something in her chest tightened. It was as if the universe itself was pushing her forward. Lauren leaned back in her chair, glancing around her tidy apartment. The worn textbooks stacked on the counter. Clover, her cat, curled into a soft gray ball on the couch. The silence of the space struck her as suddenly oppressive. She imagined instead the glittering skyline of the Emirates, the warmth of Arda's hand in hers, the sound of his laughter in real life instead of through a speaker. That evening she called him on video, breathless with both fear and anticipation. "Arda," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm going to do it. I want to meet you in Abu Dhabi." The joy that erupted across his face felt worth every penny she'd just committed. "Lauren, my darling," he exclaimed, "you have made me the happiest man alive. This will be the beginning of forever." The following weeks became a blur of preparation. Arda seemed to have thought of everything. He emailed her the booking details for their hotel, the Saadiyat Island Resort, a 5-star oasis overlooking turquoise waters. The images of infinity pools, private beaches, and palatial rooms left Lauren's heart racing. "I want our first moments together to be perfect," he told her one night. "You deserve nothing less." She spent weekends shopping for new clothes, carefully choosing modest dresses and scarves after researching Emirati customs online. Her browser history filled with searches like how to greet in Arabic and what not to do in Abu Dhabi. She even downloaded a Turkish language app, surprising him with simple phrases during their nightly calls. His laughter when she tried to pronounce "Günaydin," good morning, was the kind that made her cheeks hurt from smiling. Her friends, however, were more skeptical. At lunch, Elena Morales tilted her head as Lauren showed her photos of the resort. "Lauren, it looks amazing, but don't you think this is a little risky? Meeting a man for the first time halfway across the world?" Lauren bristled. "Jess, I've been talking to him for 7 months. We talk every day. I know him better than I've ever known anyone." Elena sighed but didn't press further. She could see Lauren's mind was made up. Her parents were less easily reassured. At Sunday dinner, her father George set down his fork, fixing her with the calm, measured stare that had once intimidated suspects in his years on the police force. "Honey, I'm asking you as your father. Please reconsider. You don't really know this man." Lauren forced a smile, her heart aching. "Dad, I know you're worried. But you raised me to trust my instincts, and everything about Arda feels real. He's kind, he's stable, and he loves me. I'm not going to let fear stop me from being happy." Martha reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's hand. Just promise us you'll be careful." "I will," Lauren said, though inside she felt like a teenager again, yearning for them to see what she saw, the possibility of a fairy tale finally becoming real. The night before her departure, Lauren packed carefully, folding each outfit with precision. She placed the silver bracelet Arda had sent months earlier on top of her suitcase, then added a small turquoise necklace she had bought as a gift for him, a piece that reminded her of Arizona's desert sky. Before bed, she painted her nails a soft pink, styled her hair, and propped her phone against the lamp for their final pre-trip call. Arda's voice cracked slightly with emotion. "Tomorrow, Lauren. Tomorrow I will finally hold you in my arms. I've dreamed of this every day." Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't believe it's really happening. I love you so much." "And I love you," he whispered back. "Have a safe flight, my darling. I will be waiting." The next morning, as the plane lifted from Phoenix's desert runway, Lauren pressed her forehead to the window, watching the familiar world shrink beneath her. The mountains blurred into clouds, and she felt an almost electric current run through her veins. For the first time in years, her life no longer seemed ordinary. Hours later, as she stared out at the endless ocean beneath the aircraft, she whispered to herself, "This is it. This is my fairy tale." What she could not have known was that the dream she had chased across continents would twist into something unrecognizable before her feet touched Emirati soil. The descent into Abu Dhabi International Airport was like entering a dream. From her window seat, Lauren Carter watched the desert give way to glittering towers, their glass facades shimmering pink and gold under the setting sun. The artificial islands below, carved in impossible shapes, looked like jewels scattered in the Persian Gulf. She pressed her face closer to the glass, heart pounding with the knowledge that somewhere down there, the man she loved was waiting. The terminal was immense, gleaming, alive with voices in dozens of languages. Luxury shops lined the walkways, showcasing gold jewelry, perfumes, and designer handbags. Lauren clutched her carry-on, adjusting the modest blue dress she had changed into on the plane. She wanted to look appropriate, respectful, and perfect. Her eyes darted across the sea of faces beyond the arrival gate. And then she saw him. Arda Kaya stood tall, his frame elegant in a navy suit tailored so flawlessly it looked sculpted to his body. His dark hair was neatly styled, and in his hand he held a small placard with her name written in graceful script. When his gaze met hers, he broke into the smile she knew so well from their calls. Warm, dazzling, disarming. "Lauren!" His voice carried across the bustling terminal. She dropped her suitcase handle and rushed forward, the noise of the crowd falling away. When she reached him, she threw her arms around his neck, and he lifted her slightly off the ground in a twirl. For the first time in months, their bodies were no longer separated by a screen. Tears blurred her vision as he whispered in her ear, "My beautiful Lauren, you are finally here." They pulled apart, laughing through tears. She touched his cheek as if to confirm he was real, flesh and blood. "I can't believe it," she said breathlessly. "You're exactly who I imagined." "Better, I hope," he teased, kissing her forehead gently. The two walked arm in arm toward the baggage claim. Strangers passing by turned their heads, some admiring, some envious. Lauren couldn't help but glow with pride. The sophisticated, handsome man at her side was hers. Every doubt, every cautionary word from her parents or Elena seemed ridiculous now. At the carousel, Arda helped her retrieve her small suitcase, then guided her toward a quieter corner. There, stacked neatly against the wall, were two additional bags. One was a medium black case he pulled easily onto a trolley. The other was a large, elegant brown leather suitcase, polished and imposing, its gold hardware gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Arda placed a hand on it with a smile. "This one is for you," It's filled with gifts. Turkish sweets, scarves, carpets, perfumes. Special things for you and your family. Lauren's eyes widened. Arda, you didn't have to— Of course I did, he interrupted softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You are my future. Making you happy is all I want. He tested the suitcase's weight, grunting slightly. It is heavy, my love. But it holds treasures chosen just for you. Can you manage it? Lauren laughed nervously, gripping the handle. I'm stronger than I look, and if it's from you, I'll carry it with pride. His smile broadened. Then, almost as if remembering something, he leaned closer. There is one small favor I must ask. A business associate is waiting for me in another terminal, and I cannot bring this large suitcase through security there. Would you mind taking it through customs for me? Just wait for me in the cafe outside, and I'll join you as soon as my meeting is done. The request seemed harmless. She thought of the thoughtful gifts he had sent before, the trust they had built, the affection radiating from him in every word and gesture. Why wouldn't she help? Of course, she replied without hesitation. Perfect. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold key, pressing it into her palm. His fingers lingered, warm and reassuring. Keep this safe, my darling, just in case anyone asks. Lauren tucked it into her purse. The gesture, simple and practical, felt strangely intimate, as though he were giving her the key to something more than just luggage. He kissed her softly on the lips. I will hurry. 2 hours at most. Then the week we have dreamed of will begin. She nodded, beaming, clutching the handle of the heavy suitcase now resting on the cart beside her. As Arda walked away, his black case rolling smoothly behind him, he turned once to wave and blow her a kiss. Lauren's heart swelled. He was real. He was everything she had waited for. Pushing the cart toward customs, she rehearsed how she would tell her parents about this moment. The embrace, the gifts, the look in his eyes. She imagined their skepticism melting away when they met him in person one day. Then, from somewhere ahead in the busy checkpoint, she heard it. A sharp bark, quick and insistent. Another followed, louder this time. A German shepherd, harness taut, was weaving through the line of travelers. Its handler spoke firmly in Arabic, the dog's nose twitching furiously as it scanned bags and people. Lauren swallowed, glancing down at the large brown suitcase. The barking grew closer. The dog's ears pricked, its body stiffened, and it tugged hard toward her cart. Confusion flickered across her face. She tightened her grip on the handle as the barking erupted again, echoing across the hall. Travelers turned their heads, watching as the animal lunged forward, straining directly toward the suitcase Arda had placed in her care. Lauren's pulse spiked. She looked around for Arda, but he was gone. The sound of barking grew sharper, echoing off the gleaming walls of the Abu Dhabi International Airport Customs Hall. Travelers froze mid-step, their eyes darting toward the German shepherd straining against its handler's leash. The dog's nose hovered inches above the large brown suitcase on Lauren's cart, its body taut with urgency. "Ma'am, please step out of line." The customs officer's voice was firm, accented, leaving no room for argument. Lauren blinked, confusion rippling through her. Her first instinct was to look for Arda, expecting him to appear at her side and explain the situation. But he was gone. The crowd was too thick, the noise too overwhelming. I don't understand," she stammered, clutching the handle of the suitcase. "What's happening?" "Routine inspection," the officer replied flatly, though his eyes betrayed suspicion. He gestured toward a side door. "Bring your luggage. This way." The dog barked again, insistent, circling the cart. Other travelers were staring now, some whispering, others stepping back as if her suitcase might erupt. Lauren felt her cheeks burn, shame mixing with fear. Her legs moved mechanically, following the officers into a narrow corridor that led to a stark, windowless room. The interrogation chamber was as sterile as a hospital ward, lit by fluorescent strips that made her skin look pale and waxy. A metal table dominated the center. 3 officials filed in after her. The dog handler, a customs inspector in latex gloves, and a woman in a dark blue uniform who spoke briefly into a radio before fixing her gaze on Lauren. "Place the suitcase on the table," the inspector instructed. Lauren obeyed, her hands trembling as she lifted the heavy case. She tried to steady her voice. "This isn't mine. It belongs to my fiancé. He asked me to open it." The inspector cut in, sliding the gold key across the table. Her fingers fumbled. The key slipped twice before it finally fit into the lock. With a nervous click, the suitcase opened, revealing neatly packed layers of scarves, boxes of sweets, bottles of perfume, and folded fabrics, exactly as Arda had promised. Relief surged through her chest, so sudden it nearly buckled her knees. "See?" she said breathlessly, motioning to the colorful items. "It's just gifts. He told me." But the inspector wasn't convinced. He began removing the contents one by one, lining them on the table with precision. Each object, innocent on its own, seemed to add to a ritual Lauren couldn't control. When the last scarf was lifted, the inspector drew a knife and sliced into the lining at the bottom of the suitcase. The sound, fabric tearing, felt like the ripping of her future. From the false compartment emerged row after row of vacuum-sealed plastic packages. Each glistened under the harsh lights, stacked with chilling uniformity. Dozens of them, pressed tightly like bricks. Lauren froze. What is that?" The female officer spoke at last, her tone clipped and formal. "Controlled substances. Approximately 15 kilograms of Captagon." The words barely registered. Lauren's mouth went dry, her heart slamming against her ribs. She shook her head violently. No, you don't understand. I'm an elementary teacher from Arizona. I don't even drink wine at dinner. I thought, he said it was gifts, he said." The inspector continued cataloging the packages. Unflinching, his gloved hands moved with the mechanical rhythm of someone who had seen this before. "Street value, estimated $2 million, he muttered to his colleague. 2 million. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Within minutes, Lauren found herself seated, wrists bound in cold steel handcuffs. The officers read her rights, their words clinical. She had the right to remain silent, the right to contact her embassy, the right to legal representation. But beneath the monotone delivery lay a brutal truth. In the UAE, drug possession, no matter the circumstances, was treated as trafficking. Sentences could stretch decades. They asked her for Arda's whereabouts. Her mind spun. He had said he was meeting a business associate. He had promised he would join her at the cafe. But she had no phone number that wasn't tied to encrypted apps, no flight details, no hotel booking in his name. Nothing that could prove he was real beyond the man she had hugged in the arrivals hall. She whispered, almost pleading, "He's meeting me later, at the Starbucks outside customs. Please, if you just let me..." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. To them, it was a story they had heard countless times before. A foreigner claiming ignorance, blaming a mysterious partner who had conveniently vanished. Some hours blurred into one another. Lauren was photographed, fingerprinted, her personal belongings logged. When she was finally allowed a phone call, she clutched the receiver like a lifeline. "Mom?" Her voice cracked the moment she heard Martha Carter's familiar tone. "Lauren, oh my God, honey, what's going on? We got a call from the embassy." "Mom, I didn't know. Please, you have to believe me. He gave me the suitcase. He said it was gifts." There was a pause, muffled voices in the background. Then her father's voice, steady but heavy with fear. "Sweetheart, The embassy told us what you're facing. This is serious. We'll get you a lawyer. Just hold on. Her 10 minutes ended too quickly. As the line went dead, Lauren pressed her forehead against the cold wall, sobbing. The reality of her situation crashed down. She was alone, thousands of miles from home, accused of being a drug trafficker in one of the strictest legal systems in the world. The following morning, she met Daniel Reeves, the U.S. consular officer. His suit was crisp, his demeanor professional, but his eyes carried sympathy. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "I need you to understand. The UAE has a zero-tolerance policy for drugs. Even if you didn't know what you were carrying, the law presumes responsibility. We will assist you as much as we can, but this will not be easy." Lauren clung to his words, desperate for reassurance. "But I'm innocent. I can prove it. I have months of messages, video calls, gifts. He's real. He tricked me." Reeves sighed softly. "I believe you. But convincing the courts here is another matter." The sentence hit harder than the handcuffs. Belief wasn't enough. As Lauren was led back to the holding cell, she caught her reflection in the mirrored glass again. The woman staring back wasn't the hopeful teacher who had boarded a plane in Arizona. She was a suspect, shackled, her life suspended between disbelief and despair. Somewhere beyond the walls of the airport, Arda Kaya had vanished into the city. And with him, every illusion she had once held about love, trust, and happily ever afters. The first days after her arrest blurred into a haze of exhaustion and dread. Lauren Carter was transferred from the holding cells at Abu Dhabi International Airport to a government detention facility, where the echo of steel doors and the scrape of shoes on concrete became her new reality. Time no longer flowed the way it did in her classroom back in Tempe. It stretched, warped, and suffocated. After 3 sleepless nights, she finally met the man who would represent her, Nabil Haddad, a well-regarded Emirati defense attorney. He was tall, graying at the temples, with the weary confidence of someone who had handled many impossible cases. He wasted no time sugarcoating the truth. "Miss Carter," he said across the small interview table, "you must prepare yourself. Here, possession is guilt. The suitcase was in your custody, the key was in your purse. That is all the prosecution needs to prove intent." Lauren gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "But I didn't know. He tricked me." "I can show you every message, every call. I can prove I was deceived." Nabil's eyes softened, but his words remained clinical. "We will present your evidence. It may help with context. But in this court, ignorance is rarely a defense. You must understand. You are facing a sentence of 20 to 25 years. The air drained from her lungs. At 29, 25 years meant her entire adult life. Gone. She thought of her students at Copper Ridge, of her parents in their modest Arizona home, of Clover curling up on the sofa waiting for her. A tide of nausea rose in her chest. The trial began in January, just 4 months after her arrest. The courthouse, all glass and white marble, gleamed with modernity, but inside the proceedings followed centuries-old traditions. Judges in flowing robes presided from raised benches. Prosecutors and defense attorneys argued in clipped Arabic, with an interpreter seated at Lauren's side translating in hushed tones. The prosecutor, Omar Al-Harthi, was a man of sharp features and sharper words. He presented the suitcase as Exhibit A, its false lining pried open to reveal photos of the 15 kilograms of Captagon found within. His narrative was merciless. The defendant traveled halfway around the world to meet a man she claims to know through the internet. She accepted his luggage, carried it as her own, and attempted to cross our borders with narcotics valued at over $2 million. This is not the behavior of an innocent tourist. This is the behavior of a trafficker. Lauren flinched with every word. To the court, her story sounded absurd. A love affair built on video calls and text messages. A suitcase carried without question a mysterious man who disappeared the moment she was detained. It read less like truth and more like a script criminals use to excuse themselves. Nabil rose for her defense. He presented Lauren's spotless background, her career as a teacher, her volunteer work at an animal shelter, her lack of any criminal history. He introduced bundles of printed messages between her and Arda, translated into Arabic, showing months of romantic conversations. This woman, he argued, is not a smuggler. She's a victim. She was manipulated by a professional con artist who crafted an elaborate relationship solely to exploit her trust. She had no knowledge of what was in that suitcase. The real trafficker vanished, leaving her to pay the price. When Lauren took the stand, her knees nearly buckled. She swore an oath, then spoke slowly, guided by the interpreter. She told the story of her life in Tempe, her longing for love, how she met Arda on World Connect, how he made her feel seen and valued in ways no one else had. Her voice cracked when she reached the moment at the airport. I believed him. I believed every word. If I had known what was in that suitcase, I would never have touched it. I'm a teacher, not a criminal. I was going to meet the man I thought I would marry. Her mother, Martha, sobbed openly in the gallery. Her father, George, usually stoic, bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. Lauren wanted to reach out, to assure them it would be all right, but the guards beside her never let her forget the chains at her wrists. Then came the cross-examination. Prosecutor Al Harthy's voice sliced through the translator's monotone like steel. Miss Carter, you expect this court to believe you carried a suitcase containing millions of dollars in drugs without any suspicion. You did not ask why it was so heavy. You did not question why this man, who you had never met in person, asked you to carry it. Lauren's throat tightened. I trusted him. I thought it was gifts. You trusted so blindly, Al Harthy interrupted, that you became a perfect smuggler, a trafficker hiding in plain sight. She felt her face flush with panic. The more she insisted on her innocence, the more naive she sounded. To the prosecutor, her story was not proof of manipulation. It was proof of foolish complicity. Nabil countered with expert testimony. Dr. Lila Chen, a criminologist, explained to the court how international romance scams worked, how criminals targeted emotionally vulnerable individuals, groomed them over months, and finally exploited them as unwitting couriers. This case, Dr. Chen testified, follows the exact pattern seen in dozens of other victims worldwide. The defendant's age, background, and online activity made her a perfect target. The scammer invested months building trust precisely so she would carry the suitcase without question. Her words gave Lauren a flicker of hope. Perhaps finally someone understood. But hope proved fragile. After 3 weeks of hearings, testimony, and deliberations, the judgment came down in a courtroom silent enough to hear a heartbeat. The presiding judge spoke in Arabic, his tone measured. Final. The interpreter whispered the English translation into Lauren's ear. The court finds the defendant, Lauren Michelle Carter, guilty of possession of narcotics with intent to distribute. The sentence is 25 years imprisonment. The words hollowed her. Her vision blurred. She barely noticed when her knees buckled and she collapsed into the chair behind her. Her mother's anguished cry tore through the chamber. Her father's hands gripped the wooden bench. His knuckles white as tears streamed down his face. Reporters in the gallery scribbled frantically, their phones buzzing with headlines ready to ignite across the world. As guards pulled her to her feet and tightened the shackles on her wrists, Lauren turned once more toward her parents. Their faces, aged by grief, were the last image she carried with her as she was led away from the courtroom. The fairy tale was gone. In its place stood a nightmare that had only just begun. The drive from the courthouse to Abu Dhabi Central Prison was silent, except for the hum of the armored van's engine. Lauren Carter sat shackled in the back seat, staring at the blur of the desert through barred windows. The sun glared relentlessly, bleaching the sand and the sky into the same unyielding color. Every mile felt like a march deeper into exile. When the gates finally swung open, she glimpsed the prison for the first time. A fortress of concrete and steel surrounded by high walls, topped with coils of barbed wire. Guards armed with rifles stood watch from towers. Beyond the perimeter, the desert stretched endlessly, a reminder that there was nowhere to run. Inside, Lauren was processed with the same indifference as luggage at an airport. She was photographed, fingerprinted, issued a faded beige uniform, and stripped of the personal items that had traveled with her across the ocean. Her silver bracelet, the one Ada had sent her, the one she had once thought symbolized devotion, was taken from her wrist and sealed in an evidence bag. "Step forward, hands out," a guard instructed, securing an ID band to her wrist. The plastic dug into her skin, foreign and cold. She was assigned to a small cell, 6 by 8 feet, with peeling paint, a metal bunk, and a single toilet in the corner. Her cellmate introduced herself in halting English. Hala Barakat, a Syrian woman with deep-set eyes and an aura of resigned endurance. She had been serving a sentence for narcotics possession for 3 years, with 7 more ahead of her. "First day is hardest," Hala said simply. "After that, every day is hardest." Life behind bars fell into a rhythm designed to wear down spirit as much as body. Wake-up call at 5 a.m. Breakfast, flatbread, tea, sometimes a boiled egg. Work detail from 7 until late afternoon. Scrubbing floors, washing prison uniforms, hauling laundry. Dinner at 6. Rice, watery vegetables. On rare occasions, a sliver of chicken. Lights out at 9. The sameness gnawed at her. Her hands, once busy with crayons and reading assignments, now blistered from pushing mops across endless concrete floors. At night, she lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clanging of cell doors and the muffled cries of women who had already given up hope. Lauren soon learned the prison housed women from every corner of the world. Filipinas arrested for overstaying work visas, Nigerians caught with small amounts of cocaine, South Asians who had been convicted of petty theft. Some had been here for years, their sentences disproportionately harsh by Western standards. Among them was Luz Santiago, a Filipina domestic worker who had overstayed her permit. She spoke English better than most and became a small comfort in Lauren's bleak days. Luz often sat with her during meal times, explaining the unwritten rules of survival. "Stay quiet. Do your work. Don't argue with guards," Luz advised. "If you're lucky, you disappear into the background." Lauren nodded, absorbing the lesson. But she could never truly disappear. Her case had been splashed across international headlines. American teacher sentenced in UAE for drug trafficking. Some inmates recognized her from the news and treated her with a strange mix of sympathy and awe. "You really didn't know?" one Nigerian woman asked one evening, squinting across the cafeteria. "You thought he loved you?" Lauren's throat tightened. She nodded silently, unable to summon words. The woman shook her head, muttering, "You're not first. You won't be last." Once a week, Lauren was granted a 10-minute phone call. Hearing her parents' voices was both relief and torment. Her mother, Martha, tried to sound upbeat. "Sweetheart, we're talking to your lawyer every day. The embassy says there might be options. But beneath her words, Lauren heard the cracks, the exhaustion, the fear, the way every sentence trembled with tears. Her father, George, offered practical updates, masking his anguish. "We mortgaged the house for your defense. Don't worry about us. Just keep going." His voice broke once, the crack slipping through his usually stoic tone. "We'll bring you home, Lauren." Somehow. The calls ended too soon, the line cutting off with a click that left her heart raw. She would lie awake afterward, guilt pressing down heavier than any cell door. Her parents' retirement, their health, their peace, all shattered because she had believed in a fantasy. Over time, Lauren found tiny ways to endure. She began teaching English to other inmates, scratching words into scraps of paper and using broken pens. For a moment each day, she became a teacher again, not just a prisoner. Her lessons gave her a reason to rise each morning, a reminder that she still had worth. Hala, though reserved, sometimes shared stories about her children in Syria. "I have not seen them in 10 years, she whispered one night. "They will be grown when I go home. If I go home." Her voice carried no bitterness, only weary acceptance. Lauren listened, tears sliding silently onto her pillow. She realized she wasn't alone in her suffering, but that truth offered little comfort. 6 months into her sentence, a guard called her name and handed her a folded sheet of paper. It was a letter from another inmate. Sophie Walker, a British woman serving 12 years in the same prison. "Dear Lauren," it began, "I've followed your case. I'm here for the same reason you are. I believed in someone who wasn't real. I carried his suitcase, just like you. The story is almost identical." The letter went on to describe Sophie's own online romance with a supposed businessman from Lebanon. The promises, the gifts, the trip that ended with her in handcuffs. Lauren's hands shook as she read. The similarities were chilling. The same pattern, the same trap, the same devastation. For the first time since her arrest, she felt something stir inside her chest. Recognition, validation. She wasn't the only one. At the bottom of the page, Sophie had written, "You are not alone. Together, maybe we can fight back." Lauren folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her chest as tears blurred her vision. For months, she had believed her life was over, that she was nothing but a cautionary tale. But perhaps Sophie was right. Perhaps there was still a way to fight. By the time a full year had passed, Lauren Carter had grown used to the endless sameness of prison life. The clang of doors, the sour smell of laundry, the grinding hopelessness that chewed through each day. But the letter from Sophie Walker lingered in her mind, a tiny ember refusing to die out. Soon their paths crossed in the prison yard. Sophie, lean with sharp cheekbones and cropped hair, gave a faint nod when their eyes met. "You're the American," she said in a clipped British accent. "And you're Sophie," Lauren replied softly, clutching her arms against the desert wind. From that moment, the two women began to exchange stories whenever they could. On work shifts, in the cafeteria, in hurried whispers when guards weren't listening. Sophie's ordeal was like a mirror image of Lauren's. Months of online romance, a suitcase of gifts, a lover who vanished at the airport. "They're professionals," Sophie explained one evening, lowering her voice. "Networks that recruit women like us. Educated, lonely, financially stable. They build months of trust before springing the trap. You think you're in love, but you're just cargo." Lauren's heart sank. Knowing she wasn't alone was comforting, but it also confirmed the cruel pattern. She had been hunted, profiled, chosen. Through letters and conversations, Lauren and Sophie began gathering details. They compared notes with other women imprisoned under similar charges. Slowly, a mosaic formed, a network stretching across Turkey, Lebanon, and the Gulf states. False passports, fake dating profiles, luxury photos stolen from real models' social media. The most chilling detail came from Sophie. Interpol's been tracking these rings for years, she told Lauren, but the criminals are slippery. They hide behind dozens of names, burn phones, and use women like us to take the fall. Lauren's chest tightened. So they walk free, and we rot here. Unless, Sophie leaned closer, eyes hard with determination. We help prove the pattern. Every letter, every photo, every video call. It's evidence. If enough of us speak, maybe someone out there will listen. For the first time since her arrest, Lauren felt something other than despair, a sliver of purpose. News of her case had already sparked attention back home. Major outlets ran headlines. American teacher trapped in UAE prison after online love scam. A social media campaign, Nash Justice for Lauren, spread across Twitter and Instagram. Strangers sent letters of support to her parents, raising funds for appeals. Her lawyer, Nabil Haddad, visited with updates. "Your story is gaining traction," he said, flipping through a folder of clippings. "There is pressure on the State Department. Human rights organizations are beginning to take interest." Lauren clung to his words, but Nabil tempered the hope with caution. "The prosecution here remains unmoved. Their position is simple. You had the drugs. That is enough." Still, he promised to keep pushing. "If we can tie your case to an international operation, if we can prove you were targeted by a criminal network, that changes everything." Months later, another letter reached her through the embassy. It was from Jennifer Walsh, a Canadian woman imprisoned in Sharjah under nearly identical circumstances. "Dear Lauren, I read about your case in the papers. You're not alone. I was tricked by a man from Lebanon who promised marriage. He sent me to Dubai with his luggage. When I opened it, the police found heroin. I am serving 12 years. Please, do not give up. Together, maybe we can expose them." Lauren read the letter over and over. Each word lit the ember inside her chest brighter. She wasn't a singular tragedy. She was part of a chain. Dozens, maybe hundreds of women lured into carrying narcotics by faceless predators. The real turning point came nearly 2 years into her sentence. One morning, guards escorted Lauren to the visitation room where Nabil sat, papers spread before him. His usual stoicism was replaced by a rare flicker of excitement. "Lauren," he began, "there's news from Turkey. A man has been arrested in Istanbul, Mehmet Orhan. The authorities believe he is one of the masterminds of these romance scam networks." Lauren's breath caught. "Do they know if he's Arda?" Nabil slid a photograph across the table. The face staring back wasn't exactly the man she had kissed at the airport, but the resemblance was there. The same dark eyes, the same sculpted jaw, her stomach twisted. "Interpol says he operated under many names," Nabil explained. "They found databases of victims, records of communications, payments, and transcripts that mention you." Lauren's hands shook as she gripped the photograph. Proof. After years of being dismissed as naive, as complicit, here was the evidence she had begged for. "This could change everything," Nabil said, though his tone was cautious. "But the legal system here moves slowly. Appeals, reviews, diplomacy. It will take time, months, maybe years." Still, Lauren felt her heart hammer with something she had not dared to feel since her sentencing. Hope. That night, lying on her thin mattress, she stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark. "He can't win. They can't win. Not anymore." Around her, the prison remained the same. Concrete walls, distant cries, the heavy silence of despair. But inside her, something had shifted. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a witness, a fighter. If she couldn't yet walk free, she could at least make sure the world knew what these men were doing, and that she was not the only woman they had destroyed. Lauren Carter had been lured into a nightmare, but for the first time in years, she could see the faintest crack of light breaking through. By the 3rd year of her sentence, Lauren Carter no longer measured time in days or weeks, but in fragments of news from the outside world. Each visit from her lawyer, Nabil Haddad, or the American consular officer felt like a drop of water in a desert. One day, Nabil arrived with a different kind of expression on his face. His usual guarded tone carried something almost impossible, cautious optimism. "Lauren," he said, spreading a packet of documents across the table, "the Court of Appeals has agreed to review your case. They will consider the new evidence from Turkey, including the confession of Mehmet Orhan." Lauren's breath hitched. "The man who called himself Arda?" Nabil nodded. "Yes. In Turkish custody, he admitted you had no knowledge of the drugs. He testified you were chosen because you were ideal, young, trusting, and credible. He even said in his own words, she would never have agreed if she knew." The words made her stomach lurch. To hear her life reduced to a strategy in a criminal playbook was nauseating, yet it was also vindication. Finally, proof of what she had screamed since that night in the interrogation room, she was not a trafficker. She was prey. The appeal hearings were shorter, but no less nerve-wracking than her trial. Lauren sat once again in the defendant's chair, her wrists shackled, her heart pounding. This time, however, the courtroom was different. Instead of prosecutors wielding her naivete as a weapon, the focus turned to the elaborate fraud. Expert witnesses described the network's operations. Sophie Walker's testimony, smuggled through legal channels, echoed Lauren's own experience. Letters from Jennifer Walsh and other victims confirmed the pattern. And then came the video link from Istanbul, where Orhan himself appeared on a monitor, flanked by Turkish guards. When asked if Lauren Carter had knowledge of the narcotics, his answer was unequivocal. "No. That is why she was useful. She believed the story. She believed me." The court fell silent. For Lauren, the words were both devastating and liberating. Devastating because they confirmed she had been nothing more than a pawn. Liberating because they proved she was not guilty in the way the law had once insisted. Two weeks later, the judges delivered their decision. The interpreter leaned close to whisper in her ear, "The Court of Appeals finds the defendant, Lauren Michelle Carter, to have been a victim of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy. Her conviction is overturned. She is to be released immediately." Lauren's knees gave out. She collapsed into her chair, tears spilling unchecked. Across the courtroom, her parents, now older, frailer, worn by years of stress, clutched each other and wept. The moment she had dreamed of in the darkest hours of prison had finally come. Freedom, however, was not simple. Bureaucracy stretched the days into weeks as immigration officials processed her release. Finally, she boarded an Emirates flight back to Arizona, sitting by the window as the plane lifted off over the Persian Gulf. The same city that had shattered her life dwindled beneath the clouds, but the scars it left would never vanish. At Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, the sight of her parents waiting beyond customs nearly broke her. She rushed into their arms, sobbing as strangers clapped quietly in sympathy. For the first time in years, she was not a prisoner. She was a daughter. Life after prison was not a return to normal. Lauren's teaching license had lapsed. Many employers hesitated to hire someone associated with an international drug case, even one overturned. Nights were haunted by dreams of prison walls and the smile of a man who never existed. She eventually found work as a paralegal with a non-profit that defended Americans imprisoned abroad. Her experience, though painful, gave her the empathy and determination to fight for others. She became a quiet advocate, telling her story in interviews and documentaries, warning others about the dangers of online scams. In one interview, she said softly, "I used to believe in fairy tales. Now, I believe in warning people about the monsters who wear the mask of love." As for Mehmet Orhan, he was sentenced in Turkey to 15 years for fraud and drug trafficking. Authorities estimated he had scammed more than 50 women across 12 countries, amassing millions of dollars and destroying countless lives. He showed no remorse. To reporters, he sneered that his victims were fools who got what they deserved. The network he belonged to still existed, reshaped under new leadership, preying on new victims. Lauren knew her release was not the end, only a reprieve. There were others still trapped, women whose names would never make headlines. She carried them with her, a reminder that survival was not the same as justice. Today, Lauren lives quietly in Phoenix, working with the International Association of Romance Scam Survivors, an organization she helped create. She has never married and likely never will. Trust, once her greatest gift, had been turned against her. She often tells the story of her suitcase, not as a tragedy, but as a warning. "Love can save you," she says, "but in the wrong hands, it can also destroy you." The suitcase that ruined her life carried more than narcotics. It carried the broken illusions of a woman who wanted love, and the harsh truth that in a world full of predators, innocence can be the most dangerous vulnerability. Lauren Carter survived, but she would never be the same. And that, she believed, was the real price of her freedom.